I think we're going to get started. I'm going to put a question in the chat if everyone wants to put their responses in there for Camelle, who's our host today. Welcome to the virtual nonprofit workshop series. This series is offered as a partnership between Hartford Public Library and the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving. My name is Jessica Dolan. I'm the Assistant Director of Development here at the Hartford Public Library. Today's session is an introduction to resource mobilization. Building a sustainable donor base will be presented by Camelle Scott, Principal Consultant at Fertile Soil. Representing the Hartford Foundation today, we have Tracy Ressler and Lucas Cotignola. Lucas would like to give a quick introduction about the foundation and their support.
Thank you, Jessica, and good morning, folks. It's really great to be here. We're really excited about our partnership with the Hartford Library, where we get to co-host important workshops to support your nonprofits. My name is Lucas Coroyola. I'm a senior officer here at the Hartford Foundation as part of NSP, which is the Nonprofit Support Program, and we are the capacity building arm of the foundation. And so, as you manage your nonprofit, as you encounter any sort of capacity building need, we encourage you all to reach out to us. We support organizations with a lot of different sort of resources and supports, and learning opportunities is one of them. And so we are again grateful and thankful for the Hartford Public Library in hosting these very important and timely nonprofit management workshops. And lastly, before I turn it over to our presenter today, Camelle, I just want to share that I know that we are living in uncertain times as nonprofits these days, and we wanted to acknowledge just the time that we're in, and as you all are joining these presentations. Um, we understand sort of that it's heavy out there, and so we hope that you can take valuable information from the presentation today. And as always, we encourage you to share with your boards, share with your key stakeholders the information that you learned here today. And so I will turn it over to our presenter today, Camelle.
Course, I can't find the mute button when I need it. Hi, everyone. I wanted to start, first of all, by thanking Jessica, Tracy, and Lucas, and the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving and the Hartford Public Library for inviting me in today. I'm really excited to go over this material with y'all today. And there's a lot to go over, but I want to make some time for questions throughout as well. So I do encourage people to drop questions in the chat as we go, especially if they're burning questions. But there'll be time for a Q&A at the end as well. So if you have questions you want to save, that's okay too. Also, I realize the material we're going to go over today is so much that there may be questions even after this. So I will be putting up my contact information on the final slide, and do encourage people to reach out to me with any other questions that occur after the workshop, because there's a lot to cover, and even just in this one piece of resource mobilization. So thank you to everybody who's already introduced themselves in the chat. I hope people will continue to do that. And I'm hoping that people will start sharing a recent success story later on in the workshop. We're going to do a breakout group activity that involves that. So if you can even just start thinking about what's a success story that you can share. I don't want to spring that on you at the last minute. So there'll be an opportunity for us to do that in small groups. And without further ado, let's get into it. My name is Camelle Scott. I am the principal consultant with Fertile Soil Strategies. I have background in resource mobilization. I'm going to get into a little bit more of that in just a second. But I wanted to start by just walking through kind of the flow of today's workshop and what we're going to go over. So we're going to start off on the next slide talking a little bit about me. And this is generally the why should you listen to me part of the conversation. So I'll give you a little bit of background on where I learned what I'm going to share today. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what is resource mobilization. That may be a new term for a lot of people. A lot of time we talk about development, we talk about fundraising. Resource mobilization is a bit broader, so I want to walk through what that is and bring a little bit of history and grounding to this conversation as well. Then we're going to get into our focus. We only have 2 hours today, so I cannot go over the entirety of fundraising and grants and events and all of those things. After a conversation with Lucas and really thinking through what would be the most impactful thing to share today, I landed on donor development. And so I really want to dig in and focus there today. But if people are interested in talking about other topics, please let me know, let the foundation know. I'm happy to come back and do another one of these. But for today, I really want to focus. And then we're going to talk about identifying donors, cultivating relationships. Where do we find people who can give to our work? How do we build relationships for them or with them that will prepare them for an ask? And then obviously, how do we make that ask? How do we close those gifts? And then once we do that, how are we acknowledging our donors? How are we stewarding their gifts, making sure that they know what the impact of their giving is so that we can have a really healthy cycle of communication with our donors that encourages them to stay with us for years to come and not just give one time and never again. And then I want to get into how to use your time wisely. My philosophy about fundraising is it's not just about money, it's also about time and using it wisely and being thoughtful about preparing for financial needs for the organization, not starting fundraising at the last minute, but also being thoughtful about all of the tasks that go into working with donors, working with grants, and making sure we're maximizing our time by taking, when in the case of donors, taking advantage of the things that we're already doing and adding to that rather than adding a bunch of things on top of what we already do as an organization. So we'll talk a little bit about some time maximization strategies later on in the workshop. And then we'll end with a time for a Q&A and a closing. There's a survey that the Hartford Foundation and the library are going to talk about at that point as well. So before we get started, are there any initial questions or any burning things that we need to touch on? Okay, let's move on. So my name is Camelle, like I said, and I have about 20 years experience now as a movement leader and a resource mobilizer. That sounds wild to me, but it's true. I got my start fundraising for organizations. Actually, I like to tell people during the 2008 financial crash, which was very much a trial by fire. And as much as at the time it was very stressful, I'm almost grateful for that experience because it really forced me to learn how to fundraise very quickly and very well. And that experience did serve me well for the rest of my career. So unfortunately, it was not the best way to get my start, but I learned a lot in the process. I've had experience working on small and large development teams, including being a development department of one, which I imagine many people on this call are also a development department of one. We know, or have been a development department of one and know how overwhelming that can feel when you're dealing with donors, grants, events, and everything is on your shoulders. You might even be an executive director of development department of one, which means you are the development department, you are the executive director, you are maybe the IT department. So definitely sending strength out to all y'all who are in that role, because I have been there. And I've also been part of development teams that were as large as 70 plus people, and know what it can feel like to have a team of very seasoned, very accomplished professionals working and supporting each other, where there's somebody who's responsible for events, somebody who's responsible for grants, and people who do systems and all kinds of support work. So I'm going to be speaking from both of those places. I've served on development teams at universities, healthcare facilities, social justice organizations, and I'm currently serving as the leadership annual gifts officer at the Bushnell, which is, as many of you know, a theater in Hartford, and an event venue, actually quite complex institution. My experience also includes working with individuals, doing institutional donor development. So that's like working with private and public foundations, working with corporations, grant writing, obviously planned giving, capital campaigns, events, grassroots fundraising, and mutual aid. So really runs the gamut. Also, I'm experienced as someone who's been an executive director and has also done a lot of movement building and organizational development work in my career, experience in financial management, fiscal sponsorship, organizational planning, board development, and organizational systems. This is a piece that ties into fundraising and that I try to bring to the consulting work that I do as well. And yeah, so that's a little bit about me. Any questions on this piece before we move forward? All right, pressing on. So what is resource mobilization? Can we just get like a little show of hands, or you can put your hand up in the chat if you've ever heard of resource mobilization, if that's a term that's not brand new to you. And if anybody has, feel free to drop in the chat if you'd like to try your hand at defining this, but if not, I will jump into it for you. Resource mobilization is the process of acquiring financial, material, and other resources needed to accomplish a goal. It's that simple. It's broader than money. Obviously, money is a part of it, but it also relates to any and all resources that can be brought together to help one reach a goal. So we're talking about volunteer hours. We're talking about people who might donate food, donate space, might help connect you to relationships. And I want to highlight at this point four resource mobilizers actually, who I think are under discussed and underrepresented in these conversations about how resources have been mobilized specifically for social movements. And I think these folks are also great examples of the fact that you do not need to come from wealth yourself or have great access to wealth in order to be a resource mobilizer. There are many resources around us that people can tap into. And so there's many ways that you can bring those resources to your organization. Talking about Rosa Parks, like there's been so much conversation about Rosa Parks in recent years, and people are really getting into her legacy in a new way, which is wonderful, because for so many years we were taught, hey, Rosa Parks was tired. Untrue. Sat down on a bus and did this protest. Rosa Parks has repeatedly said she actually was not tired of anything but racism that day. But she did also, and also does deserve credit for the resource mobilization the resource mobilization work she did to support the Montgomery bus boycott, which was, and I think still is, the most successful and largest boycott in US history. That involved a great number of people who needed the buses to get to work every day, opting to not take the buses, which required them to then enlist other people to drive those folks to work. And that is an example of resource mobilization, right? Doing that coordination work, getting people to the rides, getting the rides from place to place, and making sure that they're available. Sorry. Can people still hear me? Yeah, okay, great. Sorry, my headphones just went out. Want to highlight Rosa Parks as one example. Harriet Tubman, I think, is an amazing example. Harriet Tubman is my personal hero. I think one of the greatest to ever do it. And again, somebody who we know of from her connection to the Underground Railroad, which is really what I would highlight here. If we think about the massive amount of resources that went into making the Underground Railroad function. You need people who are able to help people get from point to point, help people know where to go, have houses along the way for people to hide out in, have food for people, have clothing for people, have money and other resources to just support an entire network of folks across really the eastern seaboard of the United States to get people from southern plantations up north to freedom. So I want to highlight and acknowledge Harriet Tubman, who was also a spy. So definitely look into Harriet. She is an incredible example of leadership and resource mobilization. And then I want to highlight Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson. If people haven't heard of them, these are two amazing women, trans leaders who were involved in they were both involved in the beginning of the LGBTQ movement, which we know started with a riot at the Stonewall riots, but also they were involved in creating an organization called the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, or STAR, which was a support organization for trans women, queer folks in the area where they lived,
helping people to get housing, get food, and access to other resources, in addition to helping to raise funding for bail for people who are being targeted by the police and the criminal justice system. So these are examples of 4 women who were resource mobilizers in ways that we don't necessarily think about people resource mobilizing, but who were able to do incredible things and support communities that were otherwise shut out of accessing those resources. So I wanted to start this by grounding us in that history and recognizing that all of this, none of this is new. There are ways to do this work that are really grassroots. As you can see from Harriet Tubman, there are ways to do this work that are outside of the law, right? For Harry, and at that point, all of what they were doing was illegal, right? And so, but they were able to do that and actually change the course of United States history as a result. So, and yeah, so are there any questions on any of this history? Any thoughts? Okay, great. Moving along. What does resource mobilization look like in our organizations today, right? There's so many different ways to approach this work. Some are more conventional mainstream ways, and some are more grassroots, creative ways that people mobilize resources. So I want to get into some of that. First of all, most organizations that I work with are doing proposal writing, doing a lot of grants. That's oftentimes where people start. And oftentimes you'll see grants advertised. You want to do something in your community. It's easy to find that information and it's easy to apply relatively, as opposed to finding donors, which feels a little bit more intangible to people. This can be public grants that come from your city, your state, the federal government. It can be private grants that come from private foundations, which include, you've got your community foundations, your public foundations, you've got family foundations. So there's all sorts of different configurations that will respond to proposal writing or invite you to write a proposal for a grant. And then events is another really popular way that people like to fundraise. So whether that's a small event in your community or a large gala, events are ways that you can bring people together and get people giving. Either they can buy a ticket to the event and or give at the event. I will say, and we'll talk about this throughout today, I like events, especially small events. The larger the event, the more I caution, because the more an event costs, the more you have to raise to break even and then raise money on top of that. So I worked with a lot of organizations that are smaller that will say, oh, we should just do a gala. And if you don't already have a sizable donor base that you know will respond to that gala, and what I would recommend is that the gala serve a purpose aside from just the money that it brings in, that it also be about building relationships with those donors. And so some donors, that's what they expect and that's what they want to see, and that makes sense to do. And other organizations have a donor base that would prefer to come to a conference or could prefer to come to a house party, which is something that could be much smaller and less expensive and easier to raise money off of. So we're going to talk about some of that a little bit later on too. And then donor engagement. Obviously, this is the focus for today, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but really building relationships with individuals that support you, that love your work, making asks of those individuals that are specific and clear, and practicing gratitude always, making sure your donors know that they're appreciated, making sure they know the impact of their work, of your work and their giving. Continuing, some other ways that you might see resource mobilization show up in your organization or your community is grassroots fundraising. And there's some overlap here too. So you'll see some grassroots fundraising also might overlap into events, but things like bake sales, organizations that sell t-shirts. And I meant to point this out in the slide where I introduced myself, my About Me slide. You'll notice I'm wearing a hat that says, "We keep us safe." I actually bought that hat from Connecticut for Abolition, and they were selling that hat as part of a fundraiser for the work of their organization, right? So it's a way of getting their message out there, but it's also a way of raising money for the work that they do. And so you'll see that in a lot of organizations. Sometimes you'll have something like, a hat that you sell, but you also use it to encourage your donors to give. If you give $100 or more, you get a free hat. If you give $1,000 or more, you get a free hat. So there's different ways to use that as well. I've seen organizations and even have done myself community tag sales where folks get together and they have things that they're in their home that they want to get rid of. The community comes together and creates a tag sale space. People come in and purchase what is there, and then a portion of that goes back to the organization. So, or, you know, you can sell spots at the tag sale for people. So there's different ways to do that. And then mutual aid. We've seen a lot of activity around mutual aid, especially around when COVID had things shut down, and in the initial stages of COVID, there's been a lot of growth of mutual aid work here in the state of Connecticut and around the country, but this is also nothing new. This is something that goes way, way back. Mutual aid is solidarity-based community resource sharing that usually happens without the support of government and exists outside of traditional nonprofit structures. So a lot of the folks on this call are probably within traditional nonprofit structures. That doesn't mean you can't have a relationship with the mutual aid work that's happening around you and cannot be supportive to that work, or can't start to think about how to participate in that work as well. But this is something that I'm learning more about and that I'm really excited about. And I want to acknowledge that as a really important part of resource mobilization. And then crowdfunding is something we probably all heard of, may have also participated in. This is, for me, supporting your most engaged donors in leveraging their networks to raise money for your cause. So donors may want to enlist their friends. They may want to ask their friends to give. They may have never, it may have never even occurred to them, right? But with a little bit of support and a direct ask from you, you might find donors who are willing to do this kind of crowdfunding for you. And I'll tell a quick story here. Back when I was at, I believe, CT Core, there was a donor who was really supportive of our work, who had given for a few years. I reached out to her one day and said, hey, would you consider participating in this crowdfunding initiative we're doing? We had some software that supported it. So the way that it worked was they could put their picture in, they could put a personalized message. The software, you don't necessarily need that, but the software helped to facilitate them creating their own personalized fundraising page where they could also track what they were individually bringing in, which was really like motivating for folks, because now they could set a goal and they could try to reach that goal by reaching out to people who they really knew in real life. And I remember when I first started the conversation with her, she was really excited to help out, but she was like, I don't know how much money I'm going to raise. It's probably going to be just a couple $100. Like, I just don't think it's going to be very much. And I knew at that point that it was probably going to be a bit more than she thought. But I was like, that's fine. You know, I didn't want to overwhelm her, like to make her feel like it needed to be this huge amount of money. And so we set it up together, and almost on day one, she hit $700 raised almost immediately. And she was surprised, but it was really exciting for us to continue from that point. And I think ended up raising a couple $1,000s at the end of the day, just with this one donor. So, and depending on who your donor's network is and what levels they give, you might see a whole lot more than that. But I do think crowdfunding is a really great tool to use. It's a great way to build relationships with your donors as well, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on, is a really great strategy for sustaining donor relationships over time. So I'm going to take another quick pause for questions. I'm going to just check the chat. I don't see any, but barring no questions, we will keep it moving. Okay. So like I said, today we're going to focus on donor development. So today we're going to focus on donor development, and really just leveraging the generosity of individuals who are already in your orbit. We're going to talk about some different strategies for identifying donors, cultivating donors, like I said, mapping our support network, figuring out who's in our orbit that we can reach out to. So let's get into that. So I want to start with why. It's really important to ground ourselves in understanding why should you spend any time on donors? You probably have a lot of grant deadlines coming up. You probably have a lot of work to do. Why should I spend any time on this at all? So first thing is, it's an opportunity to tap into bases of support in your community and beyond. There are probably people already showing up to that event that you're stressing about this week that would love to donate if there was a donation envelope in the program for the event, right? That would love to donate if you scheduled a meeting with them, sat down and put it into the proper context for them. So this is an opportunity to find those people, to give them an opportunity to participate in your work in a different way. And it's also an opportunity for those people to connect you to other people outside of that immediate community who can support your work. Individual donations are usually unrestricted funds. And I say usually because you might have a donor who says, I want to give you $10,000 specifically for this thing. That's restricted funds. So make sure that you are in the interest of being a good steward of the gifts that you're given, really listening to what the donors are asking you, and making sure, I mean, if it's something that you can't agree to, I think it's really important to set boundaries with donors as well. But as long as it fits within your mission and within your values as an organization, make sure that whatever you're agreeing to spend that money on is what you spend that money on. It's very important to stay in that honest and stay in your integrity in your relationships with your donors. But barring that, most commonly, individual donations are given freely to the organization, free of restrictions. And so that what that means is that you can spend that money in the way that serves your mission without having to worry about, sometimes you write a grant and they say, well, this is not for salaries, right? You can't use this on your overhead. You can't use this on fundraising events. And that can really limit what you're able to do. So having a good, healthy pool of unrestricted funds is wonderful when there's a crisis, when there's an opportunity that comes up that you didn't expect. If all of the funding that you're getting from foundations is project support, which is another thing that sometimes happens in organizations, and your funding is very, very specific, it can make it hard to find funding for things that you need throughout the year that you didn't plan for. So really highly recommend this for that reason. Individual donors can also become volunteers, board members, and they can connect us to other supporters. So individual donors are also like, they're more than just the money that they bring. Depending on what kind of organization you are, you can bring those folks in and they may participate in your organization in all sorts of ways. And the wonderful thing about that is that that also helps you to build a relationship with your donors. Again, you want donors to give once, you want them to give twice, you want them to keep giving, right? And you want those gifts to increase over time. So the more that they feel like they're a part of what you do, the more that they're going to want to give, want to bring other people in, maybe when they can't increase their giving. It really builds that investment. Major donor initiatives can bring in large donations without an application and reporting process. So a major donor is somebody who gives at a level to your organization that is significant to you. So I want to make that really clear. Every organization's definition of a major donor is different. For some organizations, it might be, oh, you give $500. It might be you give 1,000. It might be 10,000 is the cutoff. It really depends on what donors are giving to your organization, what's that level of donors you want to set that you're maybe paying a little bit different attention to. I would say you want to make sure you're paying attention to all your donors. You want to make sure you're valuing all your donors and that all your donors feel like their giving matters, even if they're giving you $5 or $10, here and there. But the major donors who are giving at $500 or $1,000 sometimes have the potential to continue to increase. So there's a different kind of attention you want to pay to those folks where you're sitting down with them and discussing those potential larger gifts with them throughout the year and cultivating that relationship. And oftentimes, not always, because I have worked with donors who do have an application process. Maybe they have a fund that they do things a little bit more in a more processed way. But many donors, there's no application process. It's really the donor cultivation process, sit down, have a meeting, make an ask, and follow up. So, and you can, there are donors who will give you 1,000, 10,000, 5,000 if you find those folks. That's wonderful. Build sustainable relationships with your donors and encourage them to increase their giving over time. I've touched on this a couple of times, but this is one of the things that I love the most about working with donors is that it's all about relationship building. And so you can keep these folks in your orbit if you put the right kind of attention into working with them. They can become such an asset to your organization through their giving, through their volunteerism, through serving on your board, through making connections to other folks. And like I said, the idea is you want to keep them over time. So we're going to talk today about some strategies that will really build those relationships in a sustainable way. So before we move to the next slide, I did want to tell a story at this point too about just that I think exemplifies some of the points here. in my past life working at CT Corps, again, we had a donor who was donating around $50,000 a year to support our work, which was incredible. It was an incredible amount of funding that anchored our work. They even came in at times where we were struggling and adjusted the timing of that to help us get through difficult periods. They became a really, really close ally of the organization, attended our meetings, our conferences when appropriate. And one of the most, I think one of the most extraordinary experiences I ever had with a donor is someone who was doing at the time community organizing work around police accountability, was taking we actually had a protest that involved a group of us participating in a civil disobedience and getting arrested. And this donor who gave us $50,000 stood on the line with us and got arrested with us and went to jail with us. And so when I say there are donors who will participate in your work in a different way, who will really invest, and I asked him at the time, this was somebody who, in his own right had a lot of access to wealth and resources. And I asked him, why did you decide to do this with us? Why did you decide to come through? And he said specifically he wanted to be there because he knew that there were people of color who were getting arrested, and he wanted to make sure we were okay. And he felt like his privilege and his position would put him in a position to make sure that we were okay. And so I just want to highlight that. I've had so many experiences like that working with donors where the relationship was more than just the money that was coming in addition to helping us to sustain that relationship over time, because we're really building authentic relationships with folks. We have somebody who's actually coming in and invested in protecting our people. So I know we do have to close. I can stay on a little bit if people want to do more questions. I don't know if that's something that we can do. I'm happy to stay on if people have burning questions. But I also want to make space for the foundation to talk about the survey, and just want to thank everybody so much for your time and your participation today. It was really, really great getting to talk to y'all about this.
Okay. Does anyone have like one question? I think there was one question, Lucas, that you were tabling. I think, do we want to try to answer that question?
Sure. I'll bring up the question, Jessica, right after you, if you want to share the survey
Sure.
now, and then I'll bring up the question after.
So like Camelle said, thank you so much everybody for participating today. I just wanted to let everybody know that we have a free resource here at the Hartford Public Library that we make possible due to the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, a grant that we receive from them, and we have access to Candid. And that is a free software that you come into the library. You have to be at our library site. You can log in and you can learn about potential funders, grant opportunities. You can build your own profile on the website so that people know about your nonprofit. It's a great resource and tool to get to know different partners and possible organizations that you can collaborate with. Also, our next session that we'll be holding is on October 29th. That session is setting your board up for success, which Camelle just kind of talked about how important the board is. And that will be led by May Maloney, and she's the Senior Program Director at Leadership Greater Hartford. And Tracy, is going to be throwing a survey into the chat. We will also send out an email to you with some additional resources from this event today, and how to access those on the Hartford Foundation's website.
Thank you. So we have one question, Lucas.
Yes. Miranda, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, asked, what do you recommend if an organization has luncheons for the past two
Oh, I did.
years with
Yeah.
hope of trying to recapture pre-pandemic gala attendance, but still failing short?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I want to start also and just say I put my contact information up here. So if folks are leaving at 1:30, you want to follow up with me, please take down my email address. But yes, this is a great question. And I think a lot of organizations are facing differences in membership attendance pre and post pandemic. So this is probably relatable to a lot of people. My recommendation, one, this is something that would be really good to get a little bit more information about at another time. But my recommendation generally would be to maybe start with some smaller events and also have some conversations with your donors, especially the ones who, and I don't know how you organized your gala before. I know a lot of the time galas have committees that put them together, and folks who kind of take a leadership role in making sure that those events are successful. So if you have folks like that who have played that role, and who have relationships with the folks who are most likely to attend your gala, I would say talking to them and getting some information about what they think, like, enlisting them in the process of figuring out how to bring that back. But also you might want to start with some smaller events to start. Again, like I said, I love a house party. So some of those committee members might want to organize house parties for you and start getting people in the practice of coming back, but for lower stakes events that are less expensive. Because the problem is, if you organize a big gala and you put all the money into organizing a big gala and people don't show up, you have the potential to even lose money, which you don't want to do. With a smaller event, there's less of a worry there, and you can start to kind of build up people's event participation. Another thing is, I don't know if you all are having donor recognition events in addition to donor cultivation events and donor solicitation events. But those are events where you're really not asking people for money. It's just about appreciating and thanking them. That can be another really great way of getting people back in. They can be smaller scale. Obviously, you're not going to raise money from those events, but it's an opportunity to build a relationship and show some real gratitude to your donors if you can afford to do that. And that may also be something where you can get a donor or somebody to sponsor to take some of the cost off of the organization. So I'm surprised that my cat waited till this moment to make an appearance, but here she is. So everyone, this is Celeste. Um, so I hope that helps. If you, like I said, I encourage people to email me. So if you want to talk more about that question or any of these other questions and get a little bit more detailed about like sort of what you're experiencing, I'm absolutely welcome that. And might even be able to refer you to some of my folks who have more event experience who could talk about that in more detail. I think the Bushnell has had a unique experience of people sticking with our gala post pandemic, but I'd be curious to find out what they've done there, because we've had some pretty good gala attendance. So anything else before we close? Okay, sweetie.
Thank you so much, Camille. I think this was such a great workshop today. I got a lot out of it myself, so I do appreciate it. And like we had mentioned, we will send something out to all the attendees today, and keep an eye out for our next event that will be coming up on October 29th. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.